Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we'll be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Sandhagen versus Dillashaw. And this is really shaking out to be a pretty solid card, at least on paper. Really hoping no more fights fall off, because there are a number of prospects that I am very interested in watching, particularly Phillips, Maycee, Barber, Miranda, Maverick, a really solid fight there. And Punahele, Soriano, Brendan Allen. Another really fun fight. Chris Daukaus, who is looking like a pretty promising young heavyweight prospect, also on the card. Adrian, Yanez, Randy Costa, another fun fight. So this card is looking like it's going to be pretty fun. And speaking of fun cards, we did just wrap up Makhachev Moises, which on paper it did look kind of weak going into it, but I think that card definitely delivered. Lots of exciting finishes, and overall was just a pretty solid card. And diving right into the recap for the previous card, I did get 7 out of 10 fights correct there, and did come away with 10.83 units on the night. So I believe that did break another podcast record for units won in a night. It was only by the slimmest of margins, but I'll take it. Not going to complain here. So let's dive right into the breakdowns, or not the breakdowns, the recap for the last event. So I'll just start from the bottom of the card, since I did have a number of bets locked in. And usually I just go off of my Bet MMA tips page, but it's kind of out of order there, so I'll just go over the bout order from the UFC page. So kicking off the night, we had Alan Baudot, Rodrigo Nascimento. So Nascimento, I had him in a parlay, and I did take him to win by submission. Not gonna lie, Baudot did have me in that first round there. Looked like he had Nascimento hurt, but Baudot's true colors showed in that second round. The guy historically has wilted when fighters pressure him, and Rodrigo was able to get the finish there in the second round. I had him to win by submission and did put a little bit on Nascimento by submission. Obviously, that didn't cash. I expected him to be able to take Baudot down, really just control him there, and eventually find the submission with just how bad Baudot has looked on the ground. Obviously, I'm not too upset that didn't happen. It was only, I believe, a half unit bet. I was really just happy he was able to get the win and keep the parlay alive. So moving along, Francisco Figueiredo, Malcolm Gordon. No bet on this fight. Pretty low-level fight, and obviously this was going to be a dog or pass fight, if anything. Glad to see Gordon did get the win here. Looks like he'll probably be getting another fight, which we could look to fade him again. So, that's looking forward to that. Moving on, Khalid Taha, Sergey Morozov. So this was one where I didn't see too much tape prior to recording the last week's podcast, but someone had mentioned in the comments to kind of check out some of his fights on YouTube, which, on the second pass, I was able to find a few more fights, and I just felt that if Morozov was able to get some takedowns, it'd be a very competitive fight, and that's exactly what he did. Was able to, pretty clearly win that fight, so cash on that pretty easily. Moving on, Amanda Lemos, Montserrat Ruiz. And this was a fight where, along with a few other fights, I felt that the line might have been a little wide. I thought that, her and other fighters like Makhachev might not have, a lot of value at the line where it was, around like minus 500, minus 600, minus 700. So I really had to sit on this for a bit, at least throughout fight week. And, I was really thinking, while I don't think that at the time there was a ton of value, I just didn't really see their opponents getting the win here. So ultimately, I felt that they were a pretty safe bet, and that was something I had mentioned in last week's podcast. So what I was really kind of going back and forth about was, so is this a safe bet or is there no value? Because that's kind of contradictory. So what I ended up doing was I ended up just eating the chalk here, putting Lemos, Rodriguez, Makhachev, Nascimento, all those guys, all the big favorites in parlays, just because I felt they were going to win, man. A lot of their opponents weren't really UFC caliber, in my opinion. At least with Ruiz and Baudot, I felt like that was the case. You could make the argument that Parsons might be fringe UFC caliber. We haven't seen too much from him, so I guess the verdict is still out on him. Moises, I do believe is UFC caliber, but he's just fighting a much higher level fighter in Makhachev, so I felt that was pretty safe. But going back to the Lemos matchup, yeah, I took Lemos inside the distance, had her in a number of props as well. I just felt she was going to go in there and handle Ruiz. I really didn't think that Ruiz was going to be able to pull off that cheesy head and arm throw this fight. And in hindsight, there absolutely was value on Lemos. I mean, she was able to just handle Ruiz, got her out of there in that first minute. And, some people are going to say it might have been an early stoppage, but it definitely looked like Ruiz was pretty hurt there. I think she might have been out before her head just kind of bounced off the canvas and kind of woke her up a bit. But, she was going to eat some pretty nasty shots. And when the ref pulled her apart, she didn't look like she knew what was going on. So I think that was a proper stoppage. But even if it wasn't stopped at that moment, it was probably going to get stopped within the next, 5-10 seconds. So really good performance by Lemos here. I hope she gets a solid ranked opponent next, because I think she is a potential contender in the division. It's just that she is getting a little bit up there in age. She is 31, so not super old, but if she's going to go on a run, it has to be now. But moving right along, Daniel Rodriguez, Preston Parsons. So this was one where I felt that in the first round, Parsons would be dangerous. That's, usually when he does the most work. And coming in short notice, I kind of expected him to come out guns a-blazing a little bit. But ultimately, I felt that if Rodriguez was able to weather the storm early, he should be able to pour it on. Parsons coming in short notice might slow down later in the fight. So I did put Rodriguez in a parlay, and I did have Rodriguez to win in round 2. Obviously, didn't cash on that round prop. I was hoping Parsons would be able to survive into that second round, but just glad that Rodriguez was able to get the win and cash another leg of the parlay. And moving along into the next fight, we got Benitez versus Billy Quarantillo, and this was one where I did have a little bit on Quarantillo. Also had him to win in the third round as well. With how Billy Q fights, I think he is usually live for that third round finish, just because he really likes to wear on guys. The guy puts on a ton of pressure. Really's got that grinding sort of style. Didn't expect him to dominate Benitez for 3 rounds. I thought Benitez would have a little more success on the feet, but I think that Billy Q catching Benitez early was a bit of a game changer there. I think that really shifted the momentum of the fight early, and Billy Q was able to just take control of the fight early and, just keep doing damage until, it finally got the stoppage in the third round from the accumulated damage. I don't know if I completely agree with the stoppage, but at the same time, Benitez, he wasn't really, defending himself all that well, and he was just taking a decent amount of damage. So not going to complain too much about that. Moving along, Rodolfo Vieira, Dustin Stoltzfus did not have any action on this fight. Was rooting for Vieira. Good to see him get the W there. And, before anyone reads too much into that performance, Vieira, he did have a really solid jab going on there, but that was about it. And he was going up against Dustin Stoltzfus, who I don't believe is that good of a fighter. So, you don't really want to overrate him going into his next performance. However, he did look solid here, and, he was able to pace himself a lot better. Didn't gas out like a lot of people were expecting him to. And, going forward, I do think that still is a concern, but, I kind of felt that he would pace himself a little better after his previous fight. But again, Stoltzfus not really the type of guy to really make him push the pace. Moving along, Jeremy Stephens, Mateusz Gamrot. I did have a half-unit bet on Gamrot by decision, and, in hindsight, it definitely seemed like the line was almost too good to be true, because Gamrot was like a minus 200-something favorite, and the decision prop was like plus 220 or something. And Gamrot has historically been a decision guy, so it definitely felt like the obvious play for me outside of, the money line, but I felt the money line was a tad bit off. But it just goes to show you, this is MMA, and this was kind of a peak MMA moment. Gamrot was able to get the Kimura pretty much like in the first minute of the fight. And, honestly, it's just a pretty bad look for Stephens. I think that Stephens might be done here, or at least done in regards to facing top 15 guys or fringe top 15 guys, especially at 155, where the guy definitely looked like he was a bit undersized. And it kind of showed. I mean, Gamrot was pretty much able to just manhandle him on the ground. And I'm kind of glad that the Drakkar Klose Stephens fight got called off, because I did actually bet Stephens that fight. But looking at this performance, I don't think he would have fared too well in that matchup, honestly. I think Klose would have probably been able to just kind of bully him in the clinch. So yeah, if they rebook that fight and Klose is still like a decent sized dog, I might have to take a shot on Klose on, in that fight. But moving along, Marion Renault, Miesha Tate, not much to really say here. I just felt that the age and the decline of Renault was just way more of a factor here than the layoff for Tate. And this was something I did see coming. I did say that Renault would probably be competitive in that first round. But after that, Tate was pretty much able to just have her way with her and eventually get the finish. And lastly, we have Islam Makhachev, Thiago Moises. I did say last week that I just didn't feel like Moises was going to be much of a threat for Makhachev. Moises just not a very good striker, not a very potent or dangerous striker, so not a ton of upside on the feet, or not a lot of finishing upside on the feet, so it's not like Islam was just going to get flash KO'd there. I did say the only threat I really saw from him was potentially just like a freak submission. Moises does have that high-level jiu-jitsu background, but again, I don't think he's a guy who is like an absolute killer on the mat, not like a Damian Maia sort of submission grappler. He did have a moment in the fight where he was going for the leg lock, but outside of that, he wasn't really having any success at all. It was pretty much just domination by Makhachev. He absolutely paid off that price tag. I'd say he probably looked like a minus 1,000 favorite in there with just how little damage and how little resistance Moises was able to put up against him. And with that, he was able to close out the last leg of one of my parlays for a total of 10.83 units profited on the night. But that'll do it for the recaps. I got to keep this moving along here. And just a quick announcement. I am thinking about starting a Twitter for this channel just as a way to kind of give a heads up for when I do lock in bets, maybe go through some of my reasoning for taking certain bets, especially during fight week. So yeah, if anyone's interested, definitely keep an eye out for that. We'll probably get that up and running within the next week or so. But without further ado, let's get right into this card here. All right, so kicking off the card, we have Diana Belbiţă versus Hannah Goldy, and Goldy's the minus 148 favorite. Come back on Belbiţă is plus 128, and this line is actually all over the place. I've seen some books have Goldy as high as minus 200, but I'm just going to go with this line here. I think this is from Bet Online, and I'd say these are the most reasonable odds for this fight. But taking a look at this matchup, Belbiţă, at least I believe it's pronounced Belbiţă. I've heard it pronounced that way by the commentators, not trying to be pretentious here. So Belbiţă, in my opinion, is legit probably one of the dumbest fighters on the roster. Her fight IQ is extremely questionable, and am I just saying this after her most recent performance? Absolutely. Is that an overreaction? Possibly, but I don't think I'm in the wrong in saying that. That was a fight where she had a very clear advantage in the striking against Joshua, but decided to clinch up with her and just fall into her guard, giving Joshua her only win condition in that armbar. She literally gifted that win on a platter to Joshua, and she was kind of doing the same shit against McCann, where she was having some success with the striking, but just decides to clinch up out of nowhere and pretty much gets dominated from there, because in the clinch, McCann was able to land some knees, was able to land some shots, and I believe able to eventually get the fight to the ground from that position. I mean, this chick has the fight IQ of a fucking peanut. She absolutely cannot be trusted here, guys. I haven't really even broken down her skill set, but really she's just got a bit of offensive striking. Does seem to have decent hands, but she is hittable as well. And she is liable to just give away a fight, so I would not recommend betting her whatsoever. I'd say you'd probably need at least like plus 200 on her for it to really be worth it. And even then, I wouldn't recommend putting more than like half a unit on her. But at plus 128, it's an absolute joke. I wouldn't bet on this fighter. Anyways, her opponent Hannah Goldy, honestly, not very impressed with her either. I do have to say though, she does come in pretty phenomenal shape. But outside of that, not too much to be excited about. She is pound for pound one of the best shadow boxers in the division. Lots of ear punches. She's out here taking everything Michelle Waterson's worked for. There's a lot of movement with her, lots of circling on the outside, lots of kicks being thrown, and lots of power, but not a lot landing. And don't let those stats fool you, because I definitely think those are fake. There's just no way she landed 141 strikes on Robbins in that fight. I have no idea how these significant strikes are counted, but I don't see how she could have landed 141 strikes on Robbins when Jun Young Park only landed 10 significant strikes on John Phillips. Absolute bullshit. But anyways, this is a low-level matchup. I don't think either fighter is that good. I'll have to slightly lean Goldy here because I do think that she will probably have the power advantage. And even though Belbiţă does have the reach advantage, I don't think it'll matter too much. Goldy, she may have T-Rex arms, but so does Molly McCann. And even Molly McCann was able to beat Belbiţă, which is honestly a pretty bad look. In fact, both of her losses are pretty bad looks. The losses to Molly McCann and Liana Jojua, so just two very low-level fighters she's gotten beat by. And even though I don't think Hannah Goldy is that good, I feel that with her movement and the volume she throws, she could probably just squeak away with the decision here. And, with Jojua, you just never, or with Belbiţă, you just never know. She could just potentially just throw away the fight at any point. And I do feel that Goldy is probably going to be the stronger fighter. And with how Belbiţă fights, inevitably they're going to clinch up. And I feel that Goldy will likely have the advantage there. But again, it's a very low-level fight. I am going to go with Goldy, but with just extremely low confidence. Honestly, I could see this fight going either way, but the pick is Goldy. However, I'm staying far, far away from this fight from a betting perspective. All right, moving right along, we got Sijara Eubanks versus Elise Reed, and Eubanks is the minus 280 favorite. Comeback on Reed is plus 240, and Reed, she's making her UFC debut here, 4-0 against a pretty battle-tested vet in Eubanks, which is kind of weird to say because Eubanks is 6-6, but she's got a good amount of fights in the UFC actually, and I think had most of her career in the UFC, if I'm not mistaken here. And flipping through her record now, and it does look like she came into the UFC at 2-2. Yeah, and she's fought like UFC level competition even before she joined the UFC, and fighters like Aspen Ladd and Caitlin Chukagian back in Invicta and CFFC. So, she's faced some decent fighters so far, and I completely understand why she's a big favorite here. But taking a look at her opponent, Reed, first. So Reed, she does seem to have some pretty heavy hands and kicks, but that seems to be about it. I haven't really seen much from her that I like too much of. Her grappling seems pretty bad, honestly. Her awareness on the mat seems pretty awful. It looks like she puts herself in pretty bad positions on the ground, even against pretty low-level opponents. Just overall from what I've seen, she just seems like a pretty one-dimensional fighter. And, it is worth noting that she does seem a bit undersized as well. Even at 115 against some of the other fighters, she does look a little small. And, she's going to be up against Eubanks, who historically has been pretty undersized in her matchups as well. But Eubanks is pretty well accustomed to being at 136. And I do have to mention, actually, this fight is, I believe, at 125. So they're kind of meeting in the middle here. But I do believe that Eubanks will have a decent size and strength advantage. But, just overall with Reed, she just seems like a pretty one-dimensional striker who isn't even particularly a good striker. So, yeah, kind of a rough matchup for her. She'll be going up against Eubanks, who, not a particularly great striker herself, but is pretty well-rounded. She is good at mixing up her grappling and her striking, and, she does seem to have some power, is pretty explosive with her takedowns. The biggest issue I'd say with Eubanks is she does have pretty questionable cardio. She's got a pretty bad history of slowing down in fights, but outside of that, I don't think she's like an awful fighter or anything. It's just that slowing down is never a good look, especially going up against a lot of these bigger fighters where later in the fight they're able to just kind of bully you if you're not if you don't have all your if you're tired, basically. So yeah, I'm gonna have to go with Eubanks here. I think that she's just the more skilled fighter, a lot more well-rounded. She's faced the higher level of competition. She's got a number of UFC fights. And again, even her fights outside of the UFC, it's against, I'd say, UFC caliber opponents. Whereas with Reed, she hasn't even looked that good against low-level opponents. So yeah, just not a great look on Reed's part. And I feel that there is a pretty clear path to victory here for Eubanks. And that's honestly to just take Reed down. Reed's takedown defense isn't great. Her ground game isn't great. And I think if Eubanks is aggressive there, she could potentially get a submission there. I don't know how bad or good Reed's submission defense is, but it doesn't look that good. She's, I think, almost been caught in like multiple sub attempts by pretty low level fighters. So I'm going to have to side with Eubanks here, but I don't think I'm going to look to better just because, Eubanks has historically been pretty unreliable. And, if she gasses out this fight, I could see Reed, maybe come back into it, late in the second round or, the third round and potentially get a finish, maybe, steal a round or two if Eubanks gasses herself out early. But, from what I've seen so far, I'm not really impressed with Reed. I do think that there's a pretty clear path to victory as long as, or for Eubanks, as long as Eubanks doesn't gas herself out. And part of me thinks that this fight will kind of play out similarly to to her fight with Avila, where, she was able to get her grappling going pretty successfully there, get a decent amount of control time. So yeah, I do think that, against someone like Reed, she might not even really be able to put up much resistance just because of how bad she is on the ground. So I will be siding with Eubanks here, but I don't think I will be betting her just yet. I will actually be keeping my eye open for the submission prop if it's nice, since I do think that if the fight is taking place on the ground, there might be a chance for Eubanks to find the submission, maybe even get the ground and pound stoppage. So either Eubanks inside the distance or Eubanks by submission. That'll be something I'm going to keep an eye out for when the props do open up. And moving along into the next matchup, we have Julio Arce versus Andre Ewell, and Arce is the -185 favorite. Comeback on Ewell is +160. So let's start with Arce first. The guy's a solid boxer. He's really good at slipping in and out of range. Does have a decent counter that he likes to throw, but the volume can be kind of low, especially in the first round, as he does tend to start off a little bit slower than usual. However, he will look to pick it up a bit as the fight starts to progress and he starts to get a read on his opponents. But from what I've seen, it does look like he struggles a bit with pressure, and that might be because he tends to be a little undersized for the division. Not terribly undersized, but I think it was very it was much more exaggerated in his most recent fights against Dawodu and Erosa. So this will actually be a pretty interesting fight because Arce is actually going to be moving down to 135 this fight, and it's going to be a real change of pace because it looked like he was getting pressured quite a bit by guys like Erosa and Dawodu, although he did have a bit of success countering Dawodu, or not Dawodu, but Erosa in that fight. Anyways, overall, I feel that Arce is a pretty decent striker, good boxing, but haven't really seen too much from his grappling. But moving down to 135, this could be a very interesting move for him. However, he is still going to be at a bit of a size disadvantage in this fight because he is going up against Andre Ewell, who is pretty lanky for the division. So I think they're about the same height, but Ewell's just got really long limbs, and the guy does a pretty decent job fighting at range too. So he uses his length pretty well. He pumps the jab out well, very sharp straight punches down the pipe, and he does use his kicks pretty well to maintain distance. I'd say the biggest knock on him at this point is going to be his cardio. The guy has had a history of slowing down, and he does stand pretty heavy on that lead leg as well, so it's going to be there to be chopped all day. Guys like Martinez and Gutierrez were really able to take advantage of that, and I feel there is a pretty clear path to victory here against Ewell, and really that's to push the pace on him, working the wrestling and the grappling a bit, really make the guy work, and obviously just kick out his legs because the guy's got really long, lanky legs as well. That said, though, I don't think that Arce is going to be the guy that will really be able to take advantage of that. In fact, I think Arce will actually give Ewell the fight he wants, and that's going to be a mid-pace striking match in my opinion. Arce historically doesn't really push the pace, and he's not even someone who really throws much on the feet, if I'm being honest. He does counter a lot, and a lot of his shots are usually single shots. Occasionally, he will look to blitz in with the combination, but generally, the guy just doesn't really push a pace and, doesn't really make his opponents work. He does have a bit of power, and he does have good slick boxing, but, outside of that, I don't think he's one to really work the volume at all. And if that's the case, I expect this to be a pretty close matchup. In fact, I actually kind of favor Ewell on the feet here a bit, just because I think that Ewell should be able to maintain distance and really just pick Arce apart at range. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a super lopsided affair, but I do think that Ewell will have a lot of success at range, just working the kicks, pumping out the jab, and just staying on the outside, because Ewell's actually pretty good at, keeping on the outside and just looking to outpoint opponents. So for that reason, I am going to have to side with Ewell here. I think it's actually a pretty decent stylistic matchup for him. I don't think it's an unwinnable fight for Arce. I do think that if he's able to make it real dirty, make it a very grindy sort of fight, he could win. But I just got a feeling that this is going to largely play out on the feet. And if that's the case, I do have to side with Ewell here. And I actually don't have a bet placed on this fight yet, but at plus 160, I'm actually thinking about maybe putting a unit on Ewell. So, after I'm done recording this, I might actually drop a unit on Ewell. And I guess by the time this is out, I will have already placed a unit on him. So, yeah, I got Ewell here. I think that on the feet, should be able to just outpoint Arce. So, yeah, I got Ewell here, and most likely I will put a unit on him at plus 160. So, yeah, I think this is a pretty close fight. And on the feet, I actually do slightly favor Ewell. So, pick here is Ewell, and I have him winning by decision. Moving along, we got Adrian Yanez versus Randy Costa, and this fight should be a good one. Two very exciting fighters. Yanez, very exciting striker, likes to pressure opponents, look for the counter. Will look to throw combinations when he's got opponents backed up, but he can get a little wild in exchanges. But at distance, he's actually very calm and composed there. But it is sometimes when he gets into some of these exchanges that he tends to swing a little wild. So he does seem to have a bit of power though. It can definitely crack. Striking defense is decent, really good at shelling up and blocking shots, moving his head. However, again, he does leave himself open after throwing combinations sometimes, especially when he does start to get a little wild in there. But generally he has shown pretty good durability though. Ate a kick to the face, pretty much just kind of unfazed. Pretty crazy, honestly. Haven't really seen his grappling tested, but I don't think it'll matter too much here, since Costa is primarily a striker, and he's a very aggressive striker as well, very explosive striking. Again, this guy does get wild too. I feel like I'm breaking down the same guy here, but I think Costa is actually the much more aggressive and brawly sort of fighter, whereas with Yanez, I'd say he's a bit more technical, a bit sharper in there. Costa's like basically Yanez on steroids, I think. But the guy loads up big on his shots. Can obviously crack. Lots of power in his hands. He's someone who really puts everything into his shots and can put on quite a pace. But all of his wins are by round 1 knockout, and I think the only fight that went into the second round he lost, and that was his fight against Brandon Davis, where that was a really telling fight in my opinion, because it looked like he was winning most of that fight and actually had Davis hurt in round 1 and round 2, but he was using just so much energy just looking to get Davis out of there, and was able to stuff a takedown early in the second, but gave up his back pretty early, and it looked like he tapped as soon as Davis sinked in that choke. So this guy definitely looks like I don't want to say a quitter, but, I think if the tides start to turn, or if he's not able to get his opponents out of there, he'll wilt and possibly look for a way out. And, that was only one fight, but it was the only fight where it got extended, and it was the only fight where it looked like the tide started to turn in there, and he wasn't able to really, face adversity there. And I think it is a pretty telling fight, because in all of his other fights, he's able to really just put it on opponents and just get him out of there. So, if an opponent is able to really weather the storm early, it's going to be really interesting to see how he looks in the second and third round. So, yeah, that just doesn't seem like a very sustainable style. But, it has worked largely for him so far. But, as he starts to take a step up in competition, it's going to get much tougher. And, this is going to be a really interesting matchup, because both guys, I'd say, are pretty aggressive, like to pressure opponents. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be the one that's, pushing the pace here, and who's going to be, conceding control of the octagon. I suspect it's going to be Costa, because the guy has no regard for fucking defense. The guy will just look to swing in there. So I do have to favor Yanez a bit more here just because I think that his striking is probably a bit sharper, a bit more technical. And, Costa, in my opinion, is first round knockout or bust. And, with that said, though, I definitely do think that he could potentially, knock Yanez out early because the guy does have a lot of power. So, that first round is going to be really dicey. But outside of that, if he isn't able to get Yanez out of there, I do see Yanez being able to just start to pick it up later in the fight and potentially get Costa out of there in the second or third round. So the pick here is Yanez. Don't think I'll be betting this fight just yet, at least from a money line perspective, just because 180 still seems a little wide for Yanez. I know the guy has looked solid so far, but I do feel he is riding a little bit of hype. And again, Costa is actually pretty dangerous in that first round. So I think I might just pass this from a money line perspective. The prop that I might be looking at is maybe Costa by knockout or Costa first round knockout or fight ends in knockout, just because I think that with Costa's fighting style, it's someone's getting knocked out. So there's a good chance I think one of these fighters gets knocked out here. So I think that's going to be the play most likely. Don't think I'll be playing the money line. I think both guys honestly are still a little unproven, both very young fighters, still lots of room for development and growth. So this will be a good fight to really just sit back and watch and just enjoy, honestly. And there will probably be plenty of opportunities to either bet or fade these guys going forward, because I have a good feeling that these guys are probably going to stick around in the UFC. I think they're pretty solid fighters, at least with Yanez. I don't know about Costa. The guy's just a little wild for my liking, but with his fighting style, I think the UFC just like these action fighters too. So definitely lots of opportunities to look to bet these guys going forward. Moving along, we have Nassourdine Imavov versus Ian Heinisch. And let's start with Imavov. So the guy, he's pretty light on the feet, does have a solid jab. He's very sharp, very accurate striking. Does seem to have a bit of power as well, does have a bit of pop in his punches. Does seem to be pretty defensively sound as well. Just all in all, I'd say a pretty solid striker. Does also seem to have some nice front chokes in his arsenal as well. Haven't really seen his takedown defense tested too much outside of that Haas fight. And, I don't know if that's one you could really take too much from, since Haas, is a pretty solid wrestler, is very explosive, very strong, and is pretty dangerous on the feet too. So the guy can set up his wrestling really well and can really get his wrestling game going. And that was a fight where Nassourdine was actually able to get the better of Haas in the striking exchanges, in my opinion. In fact, he actually had Haas hurt in that third round, but wasn't able to finish. And, I remember a lot of people saying, why'd he clinch up with Haas? He should have just gone for the finish. And, I'm sure he would have liked to do that, but I'm pretty sure the guy was just absolutely gassed. And, he was digging underhooks the whole fight, just fending off takedowns in what was a pretty high-paced grappling match, in my opinion. And, I just don't think that he's got enough in the tank to be winging bombs nonstop. He was able to get off a few shots, but if you looked at his body language, the guy was just pretty tired in there. Both fighters were pretty tired, and it was a really grueling fight. And this is actually a comment I see a lot in fights where it looks like a fighter's starting to come back and, he's starting to tee off on his opponents a bit, but then decides to just clinch up with them. People get pretty taken aback by that. Like, they think the guy's an idiot or something for deciding to clinch up when maybe he's got him on the ropes. But, I think in most of those scenarios, the guy's arms are probably just feeling like bricks at that point, and he just does not have what it takes to continue to just wing those hooks. And he's probably just looking for a way to recover a bit. Anyways, I got a little sidetracked there, but what I was trying to say there was I feel that Imavov, what was I saying? I think I was saying, I haven't really seen his wrestling. His defensive grappling, not really tested in my opinion, but, I guess that brings me to my last point with Imavov is that I do think that maybe his cardio is maybe a little bit questionable because, it did look like he was slowing down a decent amount against Haas and also against Williams, although, you can make the argument that those fights were pretty high paced, a lot of grappling in those fights. And if you look at his opponents in those fights, Haas and Williams, both of those guys were pretty gassed. So going forward, I guess that is definitely something to keep an eye out on. I don't think it'll be too big of an issue this fight, but, maybe going forward when he's facing other grapplers, that could be an issue. Anyways, let's move on to his opponent, Ian Heinisch. So, very, very well-rounded fighter in my opinion. Bit of a journeyman at this point, I'd say. Seems to be a pretty good anti-grappling, pretty good anti-grappler. Does have that anti-grappling sort of style where, his striking isn't phenomenal, but, he does seem to have some power. Lots of single strikes on the feet, not super layered or anything, but, the guy is able to, I guess, push a decent pace. His takedown defense honestly isn't that great either, but he's just one of those guys who is really good at just popping back up, really making his opponents work, really hard to keep down on the ground. So, if you're a grappler and you can't take him down or hold him down, he's just going to start unloading on you and really get a striking going. And we really saw him work that, game plan against guys like ACJ and Fajeda, and where, he's able to either stuff the takedowns or, get taken down and pop back up, but really just look to outwork them on the feet. And, as far as matchup goes, I do think that for this matchup, at least, I believe that he's going to be the inferior striker. And, I do think that Imavov is going to be much sharper and just much more accurate on the feet, probably the much harder hitter also. Not to mention, I think that, I know that Imavov, he's going to be the bigger fighter, and he's a bit taller, bit of a reach advantage, whereas Heinisch, he's built a bit like a brick. The guy's really wide, really thick. So yeah, I mean, this is, I feel like kind of a tough matchup for Heinisch, if I'm being honest, because if you look at the fighters that Heinisch has beaten, it's guys that aren't particularly good strikers. Like, he's really just beating grapplers, if I'm being honest, right? Guys like Sumter, ACJ, Fajeda, Mearshart, even though I feel that was a bit of a fluky knockout. I don't know how often he knocks Mearshart out if they fought a few other times. So, I think Heinisch, solid fighter, but, I think matches up a lot better against grapplers. And as far as his own grappling goes, I don't think that Heinisch is particularly a good wrestler either. I think that, going into this matchup, I think Heinisch is going to have a tough time taking Imavov down if he decided to look to grapple. I don't think that'll be, in a big part of his game plan. I think that Heinisch is definitely a worse wrestler than Haas, and Imavov actually did a decent job of, defending the takedowns and stuff against Haas. So against someone like Heinisch, I think that Imavov will have a good amount of success stuffing the takedowns if Heinisch decides to, shoot the takedowns. But honestly, I feel that Imavov should be able to keep it standing, and on the feet, I do favor Imavov a decent amount. And I think Imavov wins this a good chunk of the time. And as far as betting tips go, I do think that this should be a close fight at worst, right? And the fact that you're getting dog odds on Imavov, I think, is pretty solid value. So I've already put a unit down on Imavov. I feel that at worst it's a pick 'em, but I actually do slightly favor Imavov in this matchup. I think he's just the much crisper, much more layered striker in there. So I'm going to go with Imavov. I have him winning a pretty sound decision here. I don't know if he can knock Heinisch out. Heinisch is shown to be pretty durable. So yeah, I got Imavov here. I just think he's the better striker in what should be primarily a stand-up fight. And in the next fight, we have Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Chris Daukaus. And let's start with Shamil first. Or let's go over the odds first, actually. Daukaus is the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Abdurakhimov is plus 170. And let's start with Shamil. So Abdurakhimov, he's honestly, I'd say a pretty well-rounded fighter. His boxing is solid. He's got good counterpunching, good power and timing, but can be pretty low volume at times, and it's actually pretty crazy how low volume he could potentially be, right? And if you don't believe me, you could go watch his Derrick Lewis fight, and that was just a very, very just low-paced fight. Anyways, he does seem to have his bit of grappling to fall back to, but he's not a very aggressive wrestler from what I've seen. We'll look, for reactive takedowns, but, he's not looking to chain wrestle or really look to, be aggressive, shooting takedowns and stuff. And, at 39, I'm just not sure he's got the cardio to really put on a grappling pace either. So, I just don't think that he's going to have what it takes to really look to grapple much. And, 39, 2-year layoff. I have to imagine that the guy has regressed a good amount, and, that'll definitely work against him. in this matchup, as he's facing a much younger Daukaus who's, got a pretty significant speed advantage in my opinion. But yeah, Daukaus, he's got really good hands, very slick boxing, very quick hands, really good timing, good power. And, Daukaus, I feel, is still a little unproven, but, he's gotten really favorable matchups so far. And, he'll be getting another pretty favorable matchup in Abdurakhimov, honestly. And, like I said before, Shamil, I'd say probably the more well-rounded fighter, but at this point in his career, I just don't think that's going to be enough to really overcome like the physical disadvantages and just the age gap. On the feet, obviously, I do have to favor Daukaus quite a bit more, and I just think that Daukaus is going to be getting the better of Abdurakhimov in a lot of the exchanges. I think he's going to be landing first. He's going to be landing the harder shots, and I honestly think that he should be able to put Abdurakhimov off, man. Like a 2-year layoff at 39 at heavyweight, that just seems so dangerous. Like especially against someone like Daukaus, who is, I'd say, a pretty dangerous striker. That said, though, I do believe that Daukaus is starting to get a little overvalued. I mean, the guy's looked good for sure, but again, he has had pretty favorable matchups. I mean, Parker Porter, Rodrigo Nascimento. I mean, that was a good knockout, but yeah, Rodrigo Nascimento, Alexei Olenek, who, solid opponent, but again, much older, much slower. Daukaus was able to just find the chin, and I think that's what happens here. I think against just much slower, older fighters, he's going to be able to knock him out, honestly. And I think he should get it done here. And yeah, going forward, I do think that we'll have opportunities to fade Daukaus because I feel that he's going to be on a rocket ship if he gets this win here, right? He's going to be like crazy overvalued, especially if he gets the knockout. I just think that Daukaus, I'm not really like completely sold on him just yet. So going forward, I think there are going to be some opportunities to fade him. But in this matchup, I do think he wins. I think he wins by knockout. And yeah, I don't know if I want to play Daukaus straight or if I want to parlay him. I'll have to think about it a bit. There's a number of pretty big favorites that I like on the card. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out. I'm very interested in betting Daukaus this fight, especially at minus 200. I don't think is a bad price tag at all. I mean, again, skill for skill, I do think that Abdurakhimov can definitely make this competitive, but man, the layoff and the age is just that's a really big concern. So I got Daukaus winning here. I think he gets it done by knockout. And moving along, it's Punahele Soriano versus Brendan Allen, and Allen is he's the minus 116 favorite, and comeback on Soriano is minus 106. So, wow, this line is pretty much flipped since I've started doing tape on it. So, very interesting matchup in general. But yeah, I'll have to talk about the odds in just a second here. But yeah, Soriano, he's pretty well-rounded fighter in my opinion. Very explosive striking. Definitely looks like he's got dynamite in his hands. Wrestling is solid too, and I do believe that is his base. I have seen him look to mix it into his fights, but it does look like he's kind of fallen in love with his hands a bit in his most recent fights. Haven't really seen his takedown defense or grappling defense tested, but I have to assume that with his wrestling base that he should have solid takedown defense. So yeah, the real question mark is his submission defense and defensive grappling, but I'd have to assume that his takedown defense is solid. I'd say the second biggest question mark about him is probably the cardio. With all the power he throws, especially if he is, mixing in the wrestling, the guy is prone to slowing down. And, I think that his pacing could be a little bit better because the guy, he gets pretty aggressive sometimes. And, like I said before, his cardio, he does tend to slow down a bit in some fights because, he's only had, I think, one fight go to a decision, but, he honestly was able to gut it out. So, I don't think that we can completely write off his cardio just yet, but, the guy's got a ton of first round finishes. So it is a little concerning. The only fight that went to a decision was the Pickett fight, if I remember correctly. And, he actually put on a pretty solid performance that fight and was able to gut it out. So I don't want to completely write off his cardio. Anyways, I have seen him look to just swarm opponents when he has them hurt. And, that is a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense that, he could potentially get the KO stoppage there, but it also drains the gas tank if you're not able to get the guy out. Like, if you aren't able to get the knockout, that's a really good way to really just punch yourself out. And with someone like Soriano, who's got, pretty big power, that could be pretty detrimental. So that is definitely a bit of a concern here. But, ultimately, I do feel he's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter who, if he's able to manage his pace a little better, work on, his, in-fight decision-making, he could be a pretty scary fighter, in my opinion. His opponent, Brendan Allen, is... he's much more of a grappler. The guy's striking is decent, but he does seem a little slow in there. Defensively, he is pretty hittable. The guy was getting absolutely lit up by Sean Strickland, but I mean, Strickland, the guy's got pretty solid striking, so can't take too much from that. But it's just not a great look. Anyways, the guy is primarily a grappler. His wrestling, I don't think is that great, but if he is able to get you to the ground, is really where he's able to do the most damage. His submissions and scrambling ability is, I'd say top notch. Very proficient on the ground. Top control is solid. Again, the guy will look to work submissions. Does have decent ground and pound. So yeah, if he is able to get Punahele to the ground, it could be a bit of trouble for him, but obviously getting it there is going to be the tricky part. But as far as this matchup goes, I think I have to slightly lean towards Punahele here, just because I feel that on the feet, Punahele is, I think, a bit better. I think his striking is, it's not like more technical or anything, but I do think he's got the quicker hands in there. I think he's going to hit a bit harder. I think he's, again, a bit quicker on the feet. And, I don't think that Allen's striking is like terrible or anything, but he is extremely hittable. So, I see Punahele being able to land pretty easily on the feet. And, as far as getting this fight to the ground, I just don't think that Allen will have too much success there. I think that Punahele should be able to keep it standing and win somewhat comfortably on the feet. With that said, though, I think there are still a good amount of question marks surrounding Punahele. Again, the guy has a ton of first-round finishes, so, he's only been to the scorecards once. So it is, reasonable to kind of question how he'll fare in the later rounds, especially if, Allen, even if I don't think he'll have a ton of success with the wrestling, if he decides to put a bit of a pace on Punahele, how Punahele is going to look. And, if Punahele starts to tire in the second and third round, I can see Allen having a bit of success with the grappling, potentially find the submission in those rounds. So that is definitely a concern. The other concern is that, Allen is super durable, right? And like I said before, Punahele has shown to really unload on an opponent when he's got them hurt. And, with how tough Allen is, I can definitely see Punahele possibly, rocking Allen early and just swarming him, punching himself out and not being able to get the finish, leading to him just being gassed and possibly getting finished later in the fight. So I definitely can see that happening. And, when I first was taping this fight, I think Punahele was like minus 160 or so. And at that price, I had no interest in playing him, even though I felt that he would win. But right now, since the line has flipped, I think it's gotten really interesting because I think that, stylistically, this is a pretty winnable matchup for Punahele. I think that if he's able to keep it standing, if he doesn't, if he doesn't unload his gas tank, he should be able to get a decision win here, possibly even get the knockout because the guy is extremely explosive. So, I do favor Punahele here, and if money keeps coming in on Allen, and I could potentially get dog odds on Punahele, I'll probably maybe take a half a unit shot on him. But as it stands, I don't think there's too much value here. I think this might be close to a pick'em fight. So, I'm just going to wait and see where the money comes in. But, when the line gets just completely flipped like this, it does make me a little hesitant because I might be missing out or I might be missing something here. But as it stands right now, I am leaning towards Punahele. Moving along into the next fight, we got Mickey Gall versus Jordan Williams. And Williams is the minus 210 favorite. Come back on. Gall is plus 180, and this is a meme fight if I've ever seen one, mainly because, it's got Mickey Gall in there, and Gall, like I said, meme fighter. His striking is honestly pretty bad. He's primarily a submission guy, but, I don't even think he's like a really high-level jiu-jitsu guy either. I don't think he's a killer on the mat or anything. He's really just been submitting pretty low-level guys, right? And, let's just go through his record real quick, look at the guys he has been submitting. So, Mike Jackson, no longer with the promotion, or is he? I actually don't know. I mean, it's been a while. I don't know if that guy's actually fought since. Oh no, you know what? Mike Jackson, he actually did go to a decision with CM Punk. But outside of that, I don't think the guy's fought since. And, speaking of CM Punk, his other win was against CM Punk. Just an absolute joke of a fight. Sage Northcutt, where, I guess, Northcutt was a bit green at the time, but I guess the verdict is still out on Northcutt at the moment. And then George Sullivan, who's, just completely just a washed journeyman at that point. So I don't think the guy's got a single quality win on his record. And, where things really get interesting is, I believe, his losses. I mean, we have Diego Sanchez in 2019, Mike Perry in 2020. So, these losses have just not aged well whatsoever. Honestly, I feel like outside of his grappling, he doesn't really have much to offer. And it looks like he's really only had success with his grappling against low-level opponents. And yeah, I guess luckily for him in this matchup, he will be fighting another pretty low-level guy in Jordan Williams, if I'm being honest. I think with Williams, the guy, I don't think he's bad or anything, but, he still is pretty unproven. And with Williams, I do have to say the guy is diabetic and really doesn't cut much weight. So I think he might be at a bit of a size and potential cardio disadvantage here. And I say potentially because I do think that Williams has, suspect cardio, although, I do have to say the guy actually pushes a pretty crazy pace. He comes out pretty aggressively, really, likes to pressure opponents, throws a lot of volume. And honestly, I think the only fight I've seen him gas out terribly was in his fight against Imavov, where, I think he got kicked in the nuts a few times, ate a headbutt, and went to the grappling quite a bit. But, he was able to go deep into the fight against Karen and Kuramagomedov. Shit. But yeah, I mean, so I don't have a great read on this guy's cardio. Some fights he's able to gut it out in a three rounder. Other times he just looks absolutely just gassed out there. But, all in all, I don't think the guy is terrible. Again, he likes to come out swinging, very aggressive with the striking. Does seem to have some power. It looks like he is able to hurt a lot of the guys he's up against, although, again, primarily lower level guys. Will occasionally look to wrestle, but, he is content to just brawl in there. But, above all, I think the guy is really tough, very durable, and has a ton of heart. I mean, the guy was just absolutely getting pieced up by Imavov, but would not back down, just kept moving forward. So, pretty fun fighter to watch, honestly. But, he has taken a ton of damage and, has been able to continue to just fight through it. Looking at this matchup here, I do have to favor Wright, obviously. I just am not high on Mickey Gall whatsoever. I think that Wright is going to be a bit more dangerous on the feet. I think that his striking, obviously, I think is going to be a bit better. I expect him to throw a bit more volume on the feet as well. Again, the concern here is the cardio, although I'm not sure if Gall is really going to be able to push a pace. He might be if he does go to the wrestling, the grappling quite a bit, and it could get a little dicey in there, especially in the later rounds where Gall could potentially lock up an opportunistic submission, although with Williams, he actually did show, decent submission defense against Imavov, who, was attacking the submissions a good amount when they're in the grappling exchanges, although I don't know how good Imavov's, grappling really is. So it's a big question mark there, in my opinion. I am going to have to favor Williams here, though, but I don't think I'll be betting this fight just because I feel that this could be a pretty high variance fight. And even though I'm not high on Mickey Gall whatsoever, he has shown he could lock up a submission. And against someone like Williams, who has slowed down in fights, that could be a little dangerous. And right now, I just am not seeing too much value on on Williams, if I'm being honest, at like minus 200. Although I don't want to take a shot on Gall either. So the pick here is Williams, and we'll look to probably just pass on this fight. Moving right along, we got Maycee Barber versus Miranda Maverick, and Maverick is the minus 134 favorite. Come back on Barber is plus 114, and this is actually a pretty compelling matchup between two young prospects, and I'm actually kind of looking forward to this because, we got two young prospects going at it, both fighters who, well, I guess Maverick does still have a bit of hype behind her, whereas with Barber, she used to have a bit of hype, but, 2 losses in a row, just not a good look, kind of killed the hype train a little bit, but, both fighters still a bit raw, a bit unpolished, but are super athletic, and I feel have a decent amount of potential in this division. So let's start with Barber first. Her striking, pretty subpar in my opinion. Does seem to have a lot of power, which tends to be a bit of an equalizer for her. But even some of the TKOs she's gotten, I'd say, are a little shifty, like the Aldrich and Robertson fight, where it didn't look like they were out cold or anything. They kind of just shelled up and just won it out, and the ref just kind of waved it off. So I don't think she's got like crazy knockout power or anything. She does have power, don't get me wrong, but I don't think she's going to be putting Maverick out cold or anything. But I feel against some grittier or even more technically sound opponents, I don't think those KOs will come as easy for Barber going forward. On the feet, honestly, I think she is a bit stiff and is pretty hittable. But again, she's kind of bailed out by just being a better athlete, and we saw her struggle a bit against more technical strikers, or more technical striker in Grasso, right, where she was able to really just box up Barber at range. And even though I felt like Barber was the superior athlete, probably the bigger, stronger fighter in that fight, she wasn't really able to bully Grasso like she did in some of her, or like she did against some of her previous opponents. And to a certain extent, even someone like Aldrich was having a bit of success pressuring her, and was actually doing a decent amount of damage to her in that first round before getting caught. And even Modafferi was having some success against Barber with some of the grappling. And I think Barber did get hurt in that fight, although even before she got hurt, Modafferi was having a bit of success. So I don't think that Barber is really all that skilled. She's really a fighter that's gotten by on her just athleticism, honestly. But she could still be making improvements. She's still really young, so lots of room to grow, lots of potential still. But with their opponent Maverick, I'd say she's in a pretty similar situation. I'd say that Maverick is actually coming along a bit better. It seems like her striking is a bit more technical. That said, though, she is kind of slow and hittable on the feet. I don't think her striking is like good. Her offensive striking is good, actually, but the big thing is, like I said, she is pretty slow, and she is extremely hittable. Like even in her fight against Joshua, she was getting tagged up by her, but she was just landing the heavier shots on her, and was able to get the doctor stoppage that fight. But her striking definitely seems like it's coming along. Although the only sample size we've had so far really is her 2 most recent fights in Robertson and Joshua, who honestly are pretty bad strikers, especially Robertson. So I can't say too much about her. I don't want to take too much from those performances, but it does look like Maverick is, she is comfortable to strike, but she is primarily a grappler though. But it is nice to see that her striking is coming along. But again, Maverick, she's got pretty solid timing on her level change. Her top control is pretty solid. Her jiu-jitsu is solid. Honestly, just a pretty proficient fighter on the ground. But as far as this matchup goes, I got to favor Maverick here, actually. I think that just overall, she's the more skilled fighter, I want to say. A bit more well-rounded, too. And, as far as athleticism goes, I think Barber still probably edges it out, although Maverick is, she's pretty strong for the division as well. So, she could definitely match Barber there. I don't think there's going to be a massive, discrepancy in, the athleticism or anything. And, when it comes to technique, I do favor Maverick a little bit more. That said, though, Maverick again is pretty hittable, and Barber does hit hard. So on the feet, she could land some pretty hard shots, or Barber could land some pretty hard shots on Maverick, and potentially swing the round in her favor that way. But I honestly can see Maverick having a bit more success on the ground. I think Maverick's the more proficient grappler, and Barber has shown to be a little weak on the ground, when she's off her back. So I think that if Maverick is able to work in the wrestling and really work in the grappling, I think she could have a good amount of success on the ground. And overall, I actually just feel that Maverick's the better fighter. And I also believe that she's in a better position to succeed, in the sense that, look, she's actually training out of a camp. Seems to have, a good head on her shoulders. Seems rather grounded, at least from interviews and what commentators have to say about her. Whereas, with Barber, she's still training with her dad, and they're just blowing smoke up her ass, honestly. Like, there's a fine line that you walk between, being confident and being arrogant. And it definitely feels like her camp is just hyping her up way more than what she is capable of at the moment. But at the end of the day, Barber still does have power, is pretty dangerous on the feet. But honestly, I just feel that Maverick's the more well-rounded fighter. So, I'm going to pick her to win. And, I guess on the feet, it could be close in the sense that, I think Barber might be able to land some big shots on Maverick. But I feel there's a pretty big path to victory here for Maverick if she does go to the wrestling. I might be missing something here, so let me know if I'm just completely missing a point or something. But as far as bets go, I don't know if I'll bet this just yet, just because I feel there are still a lot of unknowns for both fighters. But it looks like money is coming in on Barber, and I kind of get it. You don't want to have one fighter just be too big of a dog here, especially since this is a matchup where both fighters are still pretty green, pretty unproven. But, where it's trending now, I think that if it gets close to pick'em, I might have to take a shot on Maverick just because I feel she should be the slight favorite here, right? So, I'm going to pick Maverick to win. Not going to bet it unless I can get Maverick at maybe like a pick'em. And in the next fight, we got Darren Elkins versus Darrick Minner, and Minner is the minus 170 favorite. Comeback on Elkins is plus 145. So Elkins, where do I even begin with this guy? I guess, he's a real veteran of the sport, but has honestly looked like dog shit in his most recent performances. And I guess, it is a bit harsh since he was competitive those fights, but you really have to look at the level of competition. And, I guess starting with the Volkanovski fight and Lamas, those losses, I guess, are a bit excusable, pretty solid opponents, but I feel like his age really started to show after those fights, where, he went up against Ryan Hall, where the guy was just eating wheel kick after wheel kick against Ryan Hall. Just not a good look. Nate Landwehr, who, young prospect at the time, but is starting to look a bit like a bust at this point. And Garagori, who, he did beat to his credit, but is a bottom of the barrel opponent and was, honestly given him a lot of trouble in that fight. So, it's pretty evident that this guy is on a decline. And, he does bring a pretty solid skill set to the table. His striking and grappling are solid, but he's just so hittable at this point. And the guy just does not wear damage well whatsoever. I mean, the guy is a bloody mess in all of his fights, and that just does not look good to the judges at all. I mean, it's really hard to score a fight for the guy when he looks like he's beaten to a bloody pulp in most of his fights. Fortunately, or unfortunately for him, this might not see the cards. At least that's what used to be the narrative with his opponent, Darrick Minner. The guy historically has been a first-round sub or bust fighter. He just doesn't really go to a decision. And the one time I bet against him, he decides to fight a smart game plan. And, I'm talking about the Charles Rosa fight where the guy is able to just lay on top of Rosa for 3 rounds and pretty much just dominate him on the ground. But, Minner is, he's primarily a grappler, but, historically has been, again, a round 1 sub guy. And his last performance really kind of shook me to the core as a sports bettor. It's kind of like if Ngannou just out-techniqued Volkov or someone for 5 rounds. Obviously, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but you guys get the point. The guy just became a completely different fighter for one fight. And I guess you can kind of really just give credit to Krause, who, he's really good at coming up with game plans and keeping him disciplined in there, making sure, he's not jumping guillotine or giving up a good position to go for the submission. And, he was able to really execute and, fought a great game plan, honestly. However, I'm not completely sold on him just yet. He could be a completely new fighter under Krause. That's, totally possible. But, I don't want to read into that one performance too much. And, he could very well pull off the same performance against Rosa like he did against Elkins. But, Rosa has shown that he is pretty, I don't want to say bad off his back, but he just doesn't really have a lot of urgency off his back. And, Elkins, I do think that he's a bit washed at this point, but I do expect Elkins to put up a bit more resistance than Rosa did on the ground. So, I will slightly lean Minner here, but really with pretty low confidence, honestly. I think that on the feet, Elkins might actually be the slightly better striker, but, on the ground, I do expect Minner to have a bit of an advantage, although, if Elkins is putting up more resistance, I just don't know how Minner is going to look going into the later rounds if it becomes a pretty high-paced, grappling fight. I don't know if he's going to resort to, just jumping guillotine or just doing something crazy just because, we've only had a one-fight, sample of Minner sticking to the game plan against a Rosa who wasn't exactly, putting up much resistance. So I am going to tentatively side with Minner here just because I feel that Elkins is pretty washed, and Minner, even though, he does have a lot of fight miles on him, he is going to be, I think, the younger fighter. Well, he is the younger fighter, and, he's going to have taken a lot less damage just because the guy's historically just been in really quick fights. So I'm going to side with Minner here, but I wouldn't be so ready to jump on him at minus 170 just after that one good performance. So, again, pick his Minner, but I think I'll be passing on this fight from a betting perspective. And in the next fight, we have Raulian Paiva versus Kyler Phillips. And Phillips is the minus 224 favorite. Come back on Paiva is plus 189. And let's start with Paiva first. So, after doing a bit more tape on this guy, he's starting to grow on me a little bit more. And I did actually pick Yadong over him in his last fight, but I believe I had Yadong at around minus 150, minus 145 or so. I just felt that at the time, Yadong, he had more UFC experience, and I felt he probably would have had the speed advantage too, probably would have been able to close the distance and maybe be able to land his shots first. But as it turns out, Phillips, he's pretty quick himself, and he looked phenomenal in that fight. He moved really well on the feet, was able to use his length pretty well, and the guy's got a pretty diverse arsenal on the feet. Honestly, he throws really heavy body kicks, will occasionally mix in the spinning attacks. The guy's footwork is actually pretty solid as well, and he's got surprisingly quick hands for how tall and rangy he is, right? Like I was saying before, I thought that Yadong would have the speed advantage over him, but it looked like Phillips was seeing everything that was coming. He was able to time Yadong on a lot of the shots there, and honestly, the guy's just looked very solid so far. I'm completely sold on him, and he will look to wrestle as well. So he's got just quite a bit of depth to his game. I don't think he's an elite wrestler or anything, but that is definitely something he will go to win rounds and really just use it to kind of open up the striking as well. So all in all, I think Phillips is looking like a pretty legit prospect at this point. And, speaking of prospects, he is going up against Paiva, who, I honestly don't think is going to pan out. The guy has arguably the most padded record in the division. He's 20-3 overall, but is 2-2 in the UFC with some, pretty unimpressive performances so far against, mid-low level guys. And, he is a taller fighter for the division, but again, I don't think that he uses his length all that well. He likes to blitz in with a lot of his attacks. His footwork isn't really that great. I think he does have decent counterpunching, but I don't think his head movement's that great either. He's gotten jabbed up pretty bad by a much smaller Kai Kara France, And, that's not a really good look, honestly, because Kai Kara-France is, I think, he was giving up a decent amount of size in that fight. But, yeah, Kai Kara-France was having a lot of success there. It doesn't look like he's got particularly good power either, in my opinion. He does have one knockout in the UFC, but that was against De La Rosa, who I think is pretty bad. And if I remember correctly, the guy has been cut from the promotion. So, yeah, all in all, I just don't think that Paiva's really that good. You can argue that maybe he won the Kai Kara-France fight, but you can also argue that he lost the Zumagulov fight too, right? So, yeah, that's kind of evens out there. But in any case, I just feel that for this matchup, I think Phillips just is the far superior striker, and that I think that just he's got Paiva covered. Honestly, I think that on the feet he should be able to jab Paiva at will. I think that if he works the kicks, I think that's there all day. Paiva's legs are there to be kicked. I think he's got superior movement in there. I also think that Phillips will likely be landing the heavier shots, probably the more eye-catching shots as well. I mean, the guy's thrown a lot of spinning attacks in there, just a lot of, flashy movement. So I think that optically the guy is going to look a lot better to the judges and, quite frankly, to the audience. And lastly, I do think that Phillips can definitely work in the wrestling to win minutes. And, the guy's actually got pretty solid fight IQ in there. I've seen him just hit takedowns at the end of rounds to really, hammer the round in, and he did that in a number of his fights. So I do think that that's something that he can go to for in this fight to really just look to win minutes and just win on the cards. So I honestly think that Phillips has Paiva covered everywhere. I think that Phillips wins pretty convincingly. Honestly, I think that Paiva is a bit of a fraud. I mean, I don't think he's a terrible fighter by any means, but I just don't think he's quite on Paiva's, I don't think he's quite on Phillips' level at this moment. So I've already actually put a max bet on this fight. I think this is the first max bet that I've tracked so far, but yeah, I feel that Phillips should be like a minus 400 favorite in this spot. I think that outside of a really weird finish or a really fluky knockout or something, I think that Phillips should be able to cruise here. I think this is a pretty smash spot, honestly. So I got Phillips winning, and I got 10 units placed on him. And in the co-main event, we have Aspen Ladd versus Maycee Chiasson, and Ladd is the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Chiasson is plus 170. So with Ladd, I don't think she's got very much striking. I don't think it's that good at all. She likes to wing power shots to close the distance. Wrestling seems solid, has a nice body lock takedown. Once she is able to get the fight to the ground, she is pretty heavy on top. We'll look for submissions, throw up ground and pound as well. But, I have seen her overextend before in certain situations and have been reversed, I think particularly in that Kunitskaya fight. But it does look like she sometimes has a habit of getting a little over-aggressive with her ground and pound and just losing position. That's definitely a bit of a concern, in my opinion. And her striking did get exposed a bit against Germaine Durandamy, who was able to land a beautiful right cross on her, knocked her out in the first, I think, 20 seconds or so. With that said, though, GDR is, I think, by far the best striker in the division. And even though Chiasson is built similarly and probably has a similar skill set, I don't think she's going to be quite on that level, and I'm not sure she's got what it takes to really take advantage of that like GDR did. But stylistically, this does feel like a similar matchup, but obviously at a much lower level for Ladd. But with Chiasson, her striking is solid. She uses her length pretty well, is pretty aggressive on the feet. However, it looks like she's kind of paced herself a little bit better recently. She used to come out like guns blazing, but it looks like in her most recent fight, she was able to slow it down a little bit. Have seen her kind of overextend a bit with her aggression, which I think can make it kind of easy for Ladd to get the timing down and just shoot for a double or just go for the level change. And off her back, Chiasson just does not look that good. Fighters like Renault and Landsberg was able to have some success against her on the ground, which, isn't really a good look considering Renault is 44 and is on a pretty steep decline, and also not a very good look considering Landsberg is primarily a striker as well. So just having a striker give you that much trouble on the ground is, it's a pretty bad look. So for that reason, I do have to slightly lean Lad here, just because, or just seeing how much Chiasson struggled on the ground. I think that if Lad is able to get her on the ground, she'll be pretty dominant there. She'll probably be able to land some pretty nasty ground and pound, possibly even get the submission. I'd say the only concern here is that Lad's striking is, pretty bad, and if she isn't able to set up her takedowns well, she'll struggle getting in distance. She'll struggle getting Chiasson to the ground, but like I said before, Chiasson has shown to kind of overextend on some of her combinations, and Lad could definitely shoot like a reactive takedown off of that. However, if Chiasson fights smart, fights measured, just stays on the outside, just work the kicks, work the jab, I think she could have a lot of success against Lad on the feet. So for that reason, I do feel that Chiasson is probably the value side here, especially at plus 170. I just don't know if I could really trust her to do that. And with how bad Chiasson has looked on the ground, if Lad is able to get her to the ground at any point, that could be it for the fight. So for that reason, I'm just not too keen on playing Chiasson at even plus 170. So as far as the pick goes, I am just going to have to side with Lad here. I think that over the course of 15 minutes, she can land at least 2 takedowns, really look to either, get the ground and pound or submission finish, or maybe just, ride out the round on top. But minus 200 definitely does feel a bit steep, especially for someone like Lad, who has shown some striking deficiencies. So yeah, the pick here is Lad, but I'm not looking to bet this fight at all. I think that both fighters just have too big of holes in their games for me to want to put money on them. And in the main event, we have Corey Sandhagen versus TJ Dillashaw. And Sandhagen's the minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Dillashaw is plus 155. And this is a very, very interesting matchup. I'm very curious to see how Dillashaw looks after the long layoff, especially up against someone who is probably one of the best strikers in the division in Sandhagen. Anyways, let's start with Sandhagen here. So, on the feet, the guy is just a phenomenal striker in my opinion. He's got great footwork, really good feints, head movement is solid, fights out of both stances pretty well. He's really great at cutting angles, really mixes it up on the feet well. Attacks all 3 levels, just overall a very dynamic striker. He's also got very good timing on that flying knee. Obviously, he got that Edgar knockout, which was, really nice, but he has landed that on a number of other opponents as well. His cardio seems solid, although we haven't seen him go a full 5. He does push a pretty crazy pace also, so that's definitely going to be something to keep in mind, especially, going into rounds 4 and 5, if he's going to be able to continue with the output that he usually does, or if he's going to look to have a more measured approach for this fight. I'd say the biggest weakness with Sandhagen is probably his takedown defense. He gives up a ton of takedowns, but he is pretty good in scrambles. The way he defends takedowns, though, he really likes that like Kimura trap, and that puts you in like a number of scrambling situations, and it has kind of worked out for him so far, but it's just kind of a pretty dicey maneuver in my opinion. And so far he's only fought one like high level wrestler grappler in Sterling, and that was a fight he lost. But yeah, overall, I'd say that's the biggest part of his game that, I have concerns over. And against someone like Dillashaw, who does have that wrestling background, I expect him to really attack the wrestling and the grappling to really look to even the playing field that way. However, on the feet, I believe that Sandhagen is the best striker in the division. And, it might be a little controversial because I think some people are going to say that Yanez is probably the best striker, but that's going to be a discussion for another day. Anyways, taking a look at his opponent, Dillashaw, he's got pretty unorthodox footwork. He's got good feints as well. Very good kicking game. Very heavy kicks, actually. He's got a sneaky head kick that he likes to throw. Counterpunching is pretty solid as well. And then, of course, Dillashaw's got the wrestling to fall back to. The guy's got good timing on his level changes, and he does do a pretty good job of mixing it in there to really keep opponents, guessing. Overall, he's a very solid fighter, very well-rounded. But obviously the age and the layoff is going to be a pretty big concern here. 2.5 year layoff at 35 at bantamweight, I think, is kind of a death sentence, even for someone like Dillashaw, who, was a former champion, highest level of the sport. But I just don't think that's enough to overcome the age gap and the time off. And not to mention, the guy popped for PEDs. And even if he was still on the juice, this is a really tough matchup because it's not like he's coming back against some scrub. This isn't some tune-up fight. He's going up against a legit contender in Sandhagen. And if he's got any rust coming into this fight, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Like, even if Dillashaw wasn't coming off of a PED suspension at this age, this would still be a pretty tough stylistic matchup for him. Like, the way Sandhagen's going to look to pressure, it's going to give Dillashaw very little room to throw his kicks. He's going to have to really look to get his wrestling going, but that's going to be hard if he's getting backed up by Dillashaw or if he's getting backed up by Sandhagen. And if he telegraphs his takedown attempts too much, Sandhagen can definitely catch him. Like I said before, Sandhagen does have some pretty crazy timing on his jump knees. Overall, I just feel the pressure and the volume is going to be too much for Dillashaw. And you do have to factor in the age and the layoff. I'm going to keep bringing that up because that is, I think, a serious point in this fight. And, if he's not on his game or if he is a little slow in there whatsoever, I think Sandhagen's going to be able to put him out. I just have a really hard time seeing Dillashaw win this, especially early in the fight when he might need the first round and a half or so to really get his feet under him, really get his timing down. But against someone like Sandhagen, who is going to look to push the pace early, like the guy doesn't really have a feeler around or anything. He'll just look to pressure early and really put it on you early. So you really don't want to fall behind against Sandhagen. So I guess the other concern maybe is just the cardio of Sandhagen. If he's pressuring this hard this early, throwing this much, if he's going to fade in the 4th and 5th round, this could definitely be a concern here, especially against Dillashaw, who has had experience in those championship rounds. If he's able to survive till those rounds, he might have a bit of an advantage there. And who knows? I mean, Dillashaw, he might still be on the juice. His cardio may still be solid. So that is a bit of a concern there going in the, later into the fight. But I don't really think the fight is going to get there. I think Sandhagen is going to be able to cook Dillashaw early. I think he catches him. So the pick here is Sandhagen, and I do have like a 3.5 unit bet placed on him already. I feel that Sandhagen should be a bigger favorite. If it wasn't for the fact that this is TJ Dillashaw, he'd be a significantly bigger favorite in my opinion. I think stylistically he matches up very well with him. And then once again, the age and the layoff for Dillashaw, it just cannot be ignored here. So again, the pick here is Sandhagen, and I think he knocks Dillashaw out in the 1st or 2nd round. And that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Really appreciate anyone who's stuck around this long. Again, if anyone's found any of this content useful or interesting, please hit that like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I don't want to have to pull a guru and make 50 different accounts, so help me out here, guys. Let me know what you guys think about some of the picks. Leave a comment below. Anyways, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you guys next week.